All right, everybody, this is the video review for World War I. All right, before we get started, we have to understand where World War I started, what was really the jumping off point. And in a nutshell, basically, it's the Balkans. If you take a look at the map in this top center of this slide, you'll see the Balkans is an area in Eastern Europe. It's basically these countries right above Greece. These are areas of the world that had been under the control of the Ottoman Empire, or some of these ethnic groups are under control of the Austrian Empire, but really it's the Ottoman Empire here. And if you remember from the video review that I did of nationalism, if you don't remember that, or if you didn't watch it, you may want to take a peek at it. You may recall that after the French Revolution, one of the big powerful forces that gets unleashed with the French Revolution and Napoleon is this idea of nationalism. And when you feel nationalism, when you feel that love for people who share your culture, one of the big things is when you feel nationalism, you want self-rule. That's one of the pieces that goes together. And that is a huge issue for empires. An empire basically is a government that controls many different nations. Many different nationalities are under the control of an empire. So the Balkans is an area made up of many different nations, and much of this area had been under the control of the Ottoman Empire. And if you recall from that nationalism review, during this period of the early 1900s, the Ottoman Empire is in decline. It had, this had been a huge empire. At its peak, it had, wrapped around most of the Mediterranean Sea. But at this point, it's shrinking, getting smaller and smaller until it's really focused just on that peninsula where Turkey is located. If you may recall, in that nationalism presentation, I talked about Greece going independent, and some of the other countries, Egypt and other countries that had formerly been part of the Ottoman Empire, had gained their independence. So this area of the world, there is a lot of tension. There's a lot of there's a real potential for violence. That's why, actually, it's Otto von Bismarck, if you remember him from the nationalism. He actually said that this area of the world, that the Balkans were the powder keg of Europe. And a powder keg, if you've ever seen cartoons where it looks like a big wooden barrel that has TNT written on it with a little, and then that's a powder keg. It's basically a barrel full of gunpowder that explodes. So he basically was saying that this area of the world was going to explode. And the reason why it was going to explode is that all of these different nationalities, all of these different nations want self-rule. And these empires, the Austrian, Hungarian Empire, as well as the Ottoman Empire, are weakening. And they're not able to keep these people in line. If you look at the picture of the left, the Ottoman Empire in particular was recognized by the European powers as being very weak, that it was, nearing its end. If you remember, the Ottoman Empire came into being when it conquered the Byzantine Empire, so it's been around for an unbelievably long time. But by the early 1900s, it's known as the sick man of Europe, that this is an empire that's ending. So a lot of European nations are thinking, ooh, as the Ottoman Empire falls, we can kind of pick over those leftovers, and this is an area that's going to be ripe for for other people to increase their influence in this area as the Ottoman Empire continues to weaken. All right, so what happens is there's a country right here known as Serbia. If you look at the map, it's in pink. It's one of the ones in pink near the north. And the country of Serbia had recently gained its independence and become an independent country from the Ottoman Empire, right? So, and you'll never guess, Serbia is filled with Serbians, oddly enough. What happens is if you see, the country of Serbia goes right up against the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And the Austrian-Hungarian Empire also includes Serbians. There are Serbians who live inside the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And these Serbians who feel nationalism want self-rule. They want to be in a country ruled by Serbians. So the Serbian people of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire want to join Serbia. And that's going to be the kind of immediate cause of World War I. What happens is, you see this guy at the top, his name is Gavrilo Princip, and he is a Serbian nationalist. He's a Serbian nationalist living inside the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And so what happens is he is part of this terrorist organization called the Black Hand, and they want the Austrian-Hungarian Empire to let the Serbian people leave the Austrian Empire, let their part of the area go, and let them join with Serbia. And clearly the Austrian-Hungarian Empire doesn't want to do that. So what do? Like terrorists today, they say, all right, to make a political point, I'm going to kill somebody. And what this guy and his the rest of his organization does is they plot to kill the Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And he is the nephew of the leader of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. The emperor of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire is his uncle. And so he is in the area, he's in Bosnia-Herzegovina, that kind of area. And while he's there, Gavrilo Princip shoots him, kills the wife. And this murder, this execution, right, this terrorist action is the start of World War I, because clearly the leader of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, he says he blames the Serbian people, he blames Serbia, the country of Serbia, for this. And he says, well, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire is going to go to war with Serbia. And then Serbia, if you saw the relative size of Serbia versus Austrian-Hungarian Empire, they would have gotten their butts kicked. Serbia is under the protection of Russia. Russia's going to help out Serbia, and then basically the dominoes start to fall. All right. So that's the immediate cause. The immediate cause, the thing that sets off World War I, is the death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. All right. However, I assure you, World War I, all of the nations, most of the major nations of the world, do not all love Franz Ferdinand so much that they're like, dude, you shot Franz, man, I'm coming to kill you. No, nobody's going to war. I mean, sure, maybe Austria is willing to go to war over this guy, but the rest of the world, he's not that important to the rest of the world. You got me? So clearly there must be some other underlying causes of World War I. Okay? It's not worth it. The entire world does not go to war because of one guy's death. All right? There is more to it. And that's where we get to Maine. M-A-I-N. Maine is basically, in a nutshell, these are all of the underlying causes of World War I. So let's start with M. M is militarism. Long story short, all of the countries of Europe, this is after the Industrial Revolution. So all of the countries of Europe have built up their armies. They're very strong militarily, and all of them have a kind of aggressive foreign policy, and they're ready to fight. They're kind of primed to it. They're willing to use force to achieve their goals. They're very tough. So that's militarism. And I mean, it's pretty straightforward. The word military is in militarism, so it's pretty straightforward. A is alliances. If you remember, if you form an alliance, that's like, it's an agreement. An alliance is like an agreement. And the alliance is, if I go to war, you have to have my back. If I go to war, you're coming with me, all right? And if you've ever seen a fight between two guys share words. If two guys have a fight, 1, 2, 3, it's over. Two guys fight and it's done. But if you've ever seen where two guys start fighting, and then their friends jump into the fight, and then this one's friend jumps in, this one's friend jumps in, and next thing you know, it's a gang war, and it's like 20, 30 people ready to beat the heck out of each other, and that's like alliances. That's the idea of alliances. So you see it in individuals, you're going to see it with countries. So like I said, when the Austrian-Hungarian Empire declares war on Serbia, if the war had just been between Austria-Hungarian Empire and Serbia, we would not be studying this. It would not be that important. It would have been, they probably would have beat them in a weekend. It would have been done. one of the reasons why we study this, the reason this turns from a war between two countries into a world war is because when the Austrian-Hungarian Empire declares war on Serbia, Serbia has an alliance with Russia, which means Russia jumps into the war. And the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, once it's going to go to war with Russia and Austria, its ally, Germany, jumps into the fight. Well, now, once you have Germany and Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and they have their alliance, Russia's allies, Britain and France, jump into the war. And the next thing you know, it's who's got their colonies are jumping into the war, and it's boom, 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 and it gets huge. And that's one of the big ones. So the two alliances are the Triple Alliance, which is the German, Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and Italy. They're in the Triple Alliance, versus the Triple Entente. Triple Entente is Britain, France, and Russia. So it's the Triple Alliance, the Allies, versus the Entente, Triple Entente. All right, next one is imperialism. If you remember from our earlier one, this is a period where all of these nations of Europe, they all want to build up an empire. This is a lot of these countries are looking to increase their empire. And at this point, most of the vulnerable countries of the world have basically been snapped up, all right? There's not much territory left to get. If you want to build your empire, it probably means you've got to get territory from somebody else. Does that make sense? There's no place left to conquer. So to get a larger empire, you need to take over land that's currently being controlled by somebody else. You need to take somebody else's colonies. So that's one of the goals. Everybody wants to build their empire. They want more access to more raw materials, access to new markets, access to more ports for their ships. They want the prestige that comes with a global empire. All of the benefits of imperialism, they want to enjoy it. That's a cause to go to war. Last one is nationalism. This kind of idea, like I said, the nationalism is the reason why the Ottoman Empire is falling apart, which leads to the Balkans being this powder keg of Europe. It is nationalism which causes Gavrilo Princip and the rest of the Black Hand to commit this murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And it is nationalism where all of these European countries feel nationalism for their country, they feel pride in their country, and they are ready, willing, and able to go to war to show how great they are, to show how much they love their country, and all of that. So like I said, militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism are the big drivers that cause World War I. All right, we don't go into too much focus on World War I, the actual activities of World War I. There's just a few things you really need to keep in mind. First, this is the war with trench warfare. You should be familiar with trench warfare. It's pretty memorable, so I'm going to assume that most of you know it. This is where they dug those holes in the ground, so all the soldiers had to stand there, usually in the mud and the muck, and fire on people. This is where there's lots of diseases, there's lots of rats. It's just disgusting, disgusting conditions. And it also is this kind of thing where these two lines of trenches, there's one on one side of Germany, between Germany and Russia. There's another line of trenches between Germany and France. So basically, there's a line of trenches on either side of Russia. There's a line of trenches on either side of Germany. There are trenches on either side of Germany. So Germany is fighting a two-front war. That's important because when it comes to World War II, that's one of the issues that Hitler needs to do. Hitler does not want to make that same mistake in World War II, so keep that in mind. The second thing you need to know about the trenches is the trenches start there. The line of trenches basically don't move that much. It is warfare where not much is accomplished, except a lot of people die. Trench warfare, we saw a lot of people die, and very little territory changes hands. The two main turning points are when Russia leaves the war. Russia is forced to leave the war early because of the Russian Revolution at home. So it has to leave the war to fight the Russian Revolution. And when Russia leaves, the United States enters World War I on the side of the Triple Alliance. And it is the entrance of the U.S. that allows the Allies to win. All right, because once the U.S. comes in, that turns the tide of the war, and the Allies win. Next, you should know about women's suffrage. That the women of Europe, in Britain specifically, women are going to gain the right to vote across many countries in Europe. Basically, the argument is, here we were holding it down at home. The women were working in the factories. The women were working hard. And in exchange for all of their hard work in support of the war, they deserve the right to vote, and they generally win the right to vote. FYI, this is not true in the United States. In the United States, women do not gain suffrage yet. We have to wait till like World War II. But for Europe, this is the big one that changes. Next, the new technology. This is a big one. Again, World War I is a war that comes after the Industrial Revolution. World War I comes after the Industrial Revolution. So there are modern weapons available to fight in World War I. And that is one of the reasons why the death count is unreal. Lots and lots of people in Europe die. They call it the lost generation. There were so many people who died. It affected the population numbers for generation. If you look at the picture on the bottom right, you can see they have a machine gun. The things that they have pulled over their head, those are gas masks that they can use to protect themselves from poison gas. This is a war where they start using submarines. This is the first time we start seeing U-boats. This is planes are going to make an appearance at the very, very end of the war. But tanks, and all of this kind of advanced weapons, especially the guns that they use, the fact that they have machine guns brings the body count up by a lot. The nations of Eastern Europe are formed. We're going to take a look at a map, and I'm going to show you how the map of Europe changes. The huge human and economic cost. As you can see, 8.5 million people die, and 17 million are wounded. Now, here's the thing. If you think of wounded warriors today, if somebody loses their leg, in a U.S. soldier fighting in Iraq today, if he loses his leg, we've got all kinds of technology available to, give them artificial limbs, to give them wheelchairs, to give them, better cars. They can get a desk job working on a computer. I mean, there's a lot more options for wounded people today, way more than there was in World War I. The kinds of, there's people who are getting blind, people who have been, from the poison gas, that people losing limbs. And there wasn't a lot of technology to help them. So they're coming home. It's going to be much harder for them to make a living. Also, bear in mind, today we often hear about PTSD, which means post-traumatic stress disorder. This is this idea that it's kind of, when you go to war, a lot of people come back, even if physically they're fine, mentally the strain of seeing people die, of going through this very stressful situation, can have long-term impacts on your mental health. Again, today we have options. You can go to therapy. We work, a lot of veterans work with therapy dogs. They'll have medications, and even today, PTSD is really hard to treat. But back then, forget about it. They called it shell shock, and there was virtually nothing they did for these people. They just start, it's the very birth of even recognizing it as a real thing. Back then, if you acted all freaked out by war, they were like, oh, baby, you just, So it was just the very start where people start recognizing that this is a real thing. This isn't people being whiny or whatever. So like I said, those numbers, they're really severe. That's 17 million people. It has a huge, significant impact on the cultures. And like I said, it's going to set off a global depression. All right. So economically, it hurts all of the countries of Europe. All of their economies really suffer because of all the money spent on World War I. Last thing we need to talk about real quick is the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles, which is signed to end this war, the Treaty of Versailles is so bad, it is a cause for World War II. Let me say that again. the Treaty of Versailles that ends World War I is so bad, it actually leads to World War II. The Treaty of Versailles was designed to punish Germany, okay? It's designed to punish Germany. And because of that, that's one of the factors that leads to the rise of Hitler and to the start of World War II. All right. Oh, here, let me show you this. This is just a quick map. This is like a little review of what I said. If you see there's a line, that red line all the way to the right that says the Eastern Front, that is one line of trenches. Remember I told you there was one line of trenches between Russia and Germany? That's that line there. If you look all the way to the left, there is another red line that is between Germany, which is in yellow, and France. That's the other line of trenches. And as you can see, it really, the line of trenches does not move that much. It moves from the dark line to that one. It doesn't move by a huge amount. But like I said, just remember this idea that Germany has to fight a two-front war makes it so that even though Germany had one of the strongest armies, this really kept them from winning this war. This had a huge impact. So it's something that Hitler is aware of starting in World War II. He does not want to fight a two-front war. All right, like I said, the Treaty of Versailles was punished Germany. What do I mean by punished? First, Germany is forced to pay reparations. Reparations, if it helps, you can think of it, reparations sounds like repair. Think of it like they have to pay the cost to fix everything. They have to pay the cost of all the repairs. It's basically this idea that you have to pay a huge amount of money after the war. You say, the war is all my fault. I have to pay you all damages. So they charge Germany a huge amount of money. They have to spend a lot of money for the rest of the countries. They have to pay a huge, it's like if you lose a lawsuit and you have to pay a huge amount of money as a fine. Think of it that way. That's what reparations is. The war guilt clause, again, this is Germany saying that the entire war is their fault, which is humiliating. And finally, Germany loses both land and all of its colonies. It loses all of its colonies around the world, and it also, the nation of Germany actually gets smaller. They lose a lot of land, especially to France, okay? So these terms were very, very tough on Germany. All right, and like I said, it is so bad. How bad is it? It's a cause of World War II. This is a big change. Please remember, World War I changes the map of Europe. It changes the map of Europe. If you look at the left, you see how large Germany is there. Look to the right. You can see on the map to the right, the size of Germany gets much, much smaller. Like I said, one of the things that Germany, one of the penalties for being involved in World War I is that Germany loses a lot of territory. Secondly, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire is gone. It is gone. Stick a fork in them, they're done. The Austrian-Hungarian Empire is over. So you can see on the map to the right, what ends up happening is all of these new nations, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, all these nations of Eastern Europe are formed after World War I. Again, the nations of Eastern Europe are formed after World War I. That's important to remember because the nations of Eastern Europe are very important during the Cold War. All right, so we're going to learn about those later. So, like I said, the nations of the nations of Eastern Europe are formed. The Austrian-Hungarian Empire is over. Also, the Ottoman Empire also goes bye-bye. There is no more Ottoman Empire. As I said in the nationalism lesson, the Ottoman Empire ends after World War I. So you can see on the top set of maps where the Ottoman Empire used to be, basically the end of the Ottoman Empire, the Turks that led the Ottoman Empire, they are going to form the nation of Turkey. Okay, the nation of Turkey is basically what's left of the Ottoman Empire. The Turks that led the Ottoman Empire formed Turkey, and you can see all these countries in the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Transjordan, that's going to be formed after World War I. On the bottom, again, you can see this is another map that makes it a little bit clearer about these nations of Eastern Europe, as well as the nations of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Those are very important countries when we learn about the fall of the USSR. We're going to talk a lot about Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. I don't know if you can tell there. In the map on the right, you see where it says USSR? If you look at the top, right below Finland. As you can see, this change from in the bottom set of maps. You see how in the left it's named Russia. In the right, it's going to be named the USSR. Russia is going to be renamed the USSR because of the Russian Revolution. That's coming up in the next review video. So it is during this Russian Revolution, which takes place in the midst of World War I, that Russia will become the USSR, number one. Number two, because Russia leaves the war early, Russia had to give up territory in order to leave the war. Russia had to give up territory to Germany in order to leave the war. And that's how come Russia is much larger in the left map than in the right map. So Germany loses territory, Austria-Hungary Empire is gone, the Ottoman Empire is gone, Russia loses territory, the nations of Eastern Europe are formed. All right, one of the other things that we need to talk about is the fact that the Treaty of Versailles also includes something about forming a League of Nations. If you look on the picture on the left, the guy in that picture, his name is Woodrow Wilson. He is the President of the United States. And Woodrow Wilson believes that this World War I was a terrible thing, and that that instead of going to war, there should be some way, some kind of body where the nations of the world can discuss their problems. That instead of going to war, there should be a way to, there should be a body formed that nations can avoid war, that help nations avoid war, to allow for discussion to take place, economic sanctions, any kind of, that there should be options other than war to settle disputes between countries. Now, if you look at that picture on the left, the thing, he's holding this little pipe in his mouth, and you can see right above the pipe is this circle. That circle is I don't know if you can figure it out, that is a soap bubble. And if you're familiar with blowing bubbles, either from when you were a kid or because you have a young niece, nephew, sister, brother, you know that it's very easy to pop a soap bubble, right? So this is basically the idea. The idea is that he is being an idealist. An idealist is somebody who believes in this kind of, they have this belief like, oh, everything's going to be wonderful and the world is a good place and everything's going to live happily ever after, and that's being an idealist. Like everything's going to work out perfectly. And they claim that Woodrow Wilson is this idealist, that he thinks that he's going to be able to avoid war, and he's going to form this League of Nations. And the cartoonist is basically saying that this League of Nations is very weak. When you're comparing it to a soap bubble, he says it's a very weak institution. And the cartoonist is right. Because he thought, long story short, Woodrow Wilson thought that, I don't know if you ever heard that expression, the dogs of war. It's actually from a play from Shakespeare, oddly enough. But he thought that the League of Nations would be able to muzzle, would be able to control war, would be able to prevent war. It's not. It's not going to be able to. But you need to know that the League of Nations is formed after World War II. League of Nations is formed after World War I. League of Nations is formed. It is part of the Treaty of Versailles. The problem is Woodrow Wilson from the United States is his idea to form the League of Nations. The U.S. does not join the League of Nations. The United States does not join the League of Nations. And that makes the League of Nations really, really weak. I talked about this before, that women are going to gain suffrage. You're going to see women, again, remember, because of World War I, because of all their hard work in World War I, the women, especially Britain, are going to gain suffrage. Suffrage does not mean they suffer. Suffrage does not mean to suffer. Suffrage is the right to vote. Suffrage is the right to vote. So women are going to get the right to vote. All right, and that's it for this. Thanks so much for watching.